So,
do you think the same will apply to AI Act then potentially?
I think it could be even worse actually, because GDPR. I mean, it's PII, so it should be fairly straightforward what it is and isn't. AI is much more unknown to people than what personal information is.
And the definition is also, I mean, like in the end, PII data was quite easily defined.
Easily, I'm not sure.
If you look at the hardcore legal, this is hardcore PII.
Is the gender a PII?
Yes, I think it is.
Then what is not PII? It's. I think it's really hard to define what PII is actually. It's a very big gray zone there. And
no, I think the gray zone is bigger in AI. So I think it might risk to sort of the self-regulation, self-censorship will be bigger. But then again, companies have been through or are going through GDPR, so maybe they can sort of draw a bit of learning.
But what did we learn? Can we wish for something? If the implementation, execution, or we talk about clarity a lot in this topic. What do we want to see when this act comes in as support or guidance, or what is the sort of what are the items that were sort of missing in the concept of GDPR that we should emphasize more this time?
I think the key will be to very quickly have a very crisp definition of what is sort of red and green in that sense, and make the gray zone very, very small, so that companies can continue to do what they were intending to do in the green zone of sort of use cases, and that the red zone is very, very small. So I think.
So this gray area is one of the most biggest pitfalls here.
Because I think uncertainty, as Anders said, is better safe than sorry. And it will cost you a lot of money if you do something wrong, and no one wants to be that guy or girl that did that overstep.
Just add another perspective on AI Act, because one thing is the uncertainty for sure. Another thing is if it actually is the high risk kind of category of AI system, then there is a lot of things you have to do to comply with it. Compared to if it's low risk, then it's less regulation to comply with. Some people say it's. The intention, of course, is great, no question about that. But then, how do you implement that without, hurting innovation is really hard. And one thing or some people say that the practical implications of actually, making use of a high risk AI system will be so high that people, not because it's uncertain, but simply because it's too much work. It's too impractical to implement it, will cause people to not use AI.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I agree. And some of the clauses that they bring up that you need to comply with is with around data quality and sort of
transparency and
the models. It will require a lot of work. So I think the red area will probably be for a short while, or maybe medium term, it will be total blocker, I think.
But let's take a positive spin on this.
Yes, I was going to say exactly the same. Good.
I mean, because in a way, what the AI Act puts a finger on is our current, how should I put this nicely, unprofessionalism in dealing with data management, and for how long we've been sort of doing this patching and duct taping data. Which is inherently, you will never get to real value or scalability if you don't have a much more industrialized approach to it.
I agree.
So you could argue that when the AI Act puts the finger on this and puts this into regulation, you have two ways to think about this. Either, how can we duct tape our way around this problem now? It seems very hard. Or maybe it's the starting sound for actually dealing with data management in a much more industrialized way.
I very much hope so, and I think it's still this industry still has to realize that that's the crux of that whole AI Act, because I think that's going to be the most effort to actually reach some sort of maturity around data and data quality and data accessibility and all of that, where I think the whole practitionership ran a bit ahead, or has been running ahead, and sort of forgetting about that because the sort of the ML part was so cool. and everyone wanted to be a data scientist, and then it started to hurt a lot when you started to scale it and sort of wanting to put things into production, and you took a lot of risk. You put things that for sure shouldn't be in production.
And maybe the model was fine.
Model was
but
fine.
But the value chain, end-to-end, the data AI value chain was not fine.
No, and you could also, I mean, when we put things in production together with clients, you could also see where most of the efforts went in. I mean, the model was fine. You could sort of, it was easy. But the effort that went into making sure the data came out of the source system in the right way, the pipeline were up, someone changed something in the source system, didn't tell you, sort of the effort, that was manual work for a long time, and it still is for many. So that sucks a lot of resources.
I think I'll add that as a topic as well, to just speak about, the differences between building a prototype and putting something in production.
We are all victims of our own eagerness to show results. So we do our POC, and we actually take away the whole data management problem from the first step and just validate the model, so to speak. And then we get people excited. So we put it in production. And I've seen a lot of examples where we sort of put things in, the model is in production, but we are serving the model in a very manual way. And it's not a robust manual way because we never got around to we were not intending to do it manual, so we don't have any documented processes the way we should. And here now is the real problem. So now we scramble to put this model in production with as automated as possible. But then we have sold one pipeline in a very fragile or maybe a very hardcore proprietary way that works for that model, but it doesn't scale. It's not reusable. It's not harvestable. So this whole area, what puts the finger on that, I can see if we flip storytelling here and basically use that as we need a big fat problem and pain before we do stuff to drive change.
You're right,
So maybe that's the point then. This is the compelling event we need.
Let's hope so. I think I actually think there's some backpedaling needed in many of these topics because you ran a bit too far on the sort of AI side and sort of the ML side, and forgot about forgot about data models, you forgot about data management, you forgot about software engineering, sort of very basic software engineering practices on the data pipeline side. I mean, very few companies have sort of CI/CD, any DevOps thinking around the data. Data is just hacks that then arrives at the model. But then from the model and up, you have some sort of DevOps or MLOps thinking. So, and I also think that it suffered from data being a bit more IT. Many companies have IT operations, but not so much IT development left because they outsourced it. And then they're now hired in data scientists and ML engineers, and they're the only developers they have. And they want to spend time downstream and not upstream. So I think that, and go back 7-8 years, everyone who was a data engineer quickly relabeled themselves to data scientists, but that was the cool thing to be. So, and now we're scrambling to find good data engineers. So I think some of these topics we need to take a sort of backpedal a bit and make things right. And I think that's going on in many companies now that sort of ran ahead, started feeling the real pain, both in terms of risks and effort.
But I think I fully agree with this analysis. And I think you can see now that the companies that started fairly early and was early adopters of this, they are now into generation 2 and 3 and getting this right. My question is, I think there's a substantial opportunity to sort of learn and hack the process for the laggards. And I hope the laggards are not sort of following into the same traps. Because they could really, if I look at the cloud journeys we have made, the first cloud journey was an infrastructure story, and now we realize the cloud journey is something completely different when we start thinking microservices, data sets, data products, algorithm products, and not just doing a lift and shift from a data center point of view.
I think the tools that exist today should I mean, back
different.
then everyone tried to do everything themselves and everything was built in-house. Today there's a lot of good tools that you could use, but still I think there's many skip into a sort of a collection of use cases and then they forget about any sort of data architecture, thinking how do we build those solutions? Do we build them siloed, or do we want them to in any way interact? Do we want to have a very solid data layer that we where we can feedback things for reuse in other things? Or because I think everyone went to the siloed approach to start with and then ended up in a total mess and a lot of duplicate work.
I think that's a perfect segue actually into welcome you here.
Thank you. Yeah.
Andreas Lundmark, you're managing director and a partner of the Boston Consulting Group. And I think you know what you just said. I guess it's all about trying to scale data and AI efforts in companies in various ways.
It is, yeah.
Which is actually a favorite topic of mine as well. And I usually speak about it as how to scale with style.
Yeah,
which is really hard. And it can be easier in the beginning and you all help out and do whatever. But as soon as you started to put stuff in production and start to also become an increasing number of people, teams, products that you need to manage, things get tough.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to hearing much more about your thoughts about this. And I'm sure a lot of people are very eager to understand, the pros and cons and best practices of how to scale with style. But before we go into that, how would you describe yourself? Who is really Andreas Lundmark?
Andreas Lundmark, come from a typical small town in Sweden, Katrineholm. Grew up doing all sorts of things, lots of sports, music, reading books. Spent an unhealthy amount of time behind the computer as well.
When did you write your first program?
I think I was somewhere around 85, maybe. I think on my Commodore 64.
Cool. I have that as well.
You have it still.
No, fortunately, I sold but I had a Commodore 128.
Okay,
so I thought that was a little bit better. Yes.
No, not VIC-20.
Yeah. No, I wrote the basic stuff, and then I bought this Dator magazine where they had sort of examples that you could input, and and spend a lot of time in the old sort of bulletin board system world and downloading games and doing a bit of I sniffed on the demo scene, but that was fun days. But then sort of somewhere around.
Did you graduate to the Amiga?
I did, and then I had a PC, and then
good. Okay.
So I did that whole.
So was the demo scene on the Amiga or PC or both?
PC.
Yeah.
Good. I like it even more.
And now, what could we?
No, I found a way where I could actually write small. I wasn't part of a group, but I found a few BBSs where I could write small intros. Then I gave them to them as a small, and then I got free quota for like half a year and could download everything. That was my trick.
Cool. But what was the demo scene all about? If we put it in a nutshell for someone who hasn't.
To me, it was I was on the fringe, but and I was more on a consumer of demos than anything else. But to me, it was just immensely innovative sort of fritidsgård in a way. The amount of innovation that went into coding, graphics, music, just showcasing what you could do to your friends. And then I don't know if you watched this the TV series about the Swedish game Svenska Spelundret. Everything started there. All the big gaming studios came out of that. So I think it's quite overlooked sometimes as sort of what you can do as a teenager if you just get the tools. And that is the start of a big industry.
How do you bring people from just gaming to actually start building games then?
I actually asked myself that question. Will that happen again? Because today everything is so much more packaged. So you go to sort of a Steam or you go to an app store and download everything. Everything is neatly packaged. It works out of the box. Back in those days, you had to work a bit to get it to work, especially if you didn't always buy your games. So I think people had a grasp of what was going on under the hood and wanted to sort of understand a bit more. At least I function that way. I think that gave rise to sort of people understanding that I can actually do this myself. And I'm a bit worried. I mean, the whole sort of space today is centrally produced and then sort of consumed by people. And sort of content is done like that, and it feels like. And then of course you have the social sort of surface where you have a lot of horizontal sort of you play together. But it seems like there's a few that produces and a lot of that consumes.
I
that's a topic for AI as well. Yes. And that where I have some thoughts.
But I think the way to see if is the same thought. Back in the 80s, 90s, the distance between who was the producer and the consumer was a lot shorter, and you had to fiddle a bit yourself. So actually, in this way, you got a segue into producing more and more as more advanced you got in your consumption. Whereas now it's a quite big distance where someone needs to make a very clear effort and motivation. I look at my 14-year-old who loves gaming, and I say, why don't you think about high school, going into gymnasium, what gaming industry, how you can get into that? I don't see a drive for him to code at all. So for him, so maybe he's not the coder, right? Maybe he can be in the industry, right? But I think there's a huge distance here. He's well versed in how the gaming industry works or how he consumes, but has no interest so far in the production side.
Interesting.
In the code. Do you see what I mean?
But that's my read as well. Yeah. So I'm wondering if that was sort of a half a generation thing.
Will that come back now?
Will that come back?
Exactly.
Or won't it?
Good question. Or what would trigger that to come back if we now want to lure our kids into meaningful or maybe relevant jobs like coding?
I'm eager to go into a rabbit hole here as well. and if you look at the some of the latest AI models today, they can actually generate not only images or text, but actually code as well. And you can basically speak to it and just or write like a document string or some kind of prompt, and it actually will generate how to render some kind of button or some part of the game. Do you think that will be the future of programming, that you simply speak in natural language or write to it and that is the way to program in the future?
Probably a large or a sizable part of it could probably be that. But I mean, a large part of coding today is looking up examples and then copy pasting as well. So
copying from Stack Overflow.
This would be a quicker way to do it. But I think so, probably. But I think
that perhaps can let us go back to the shorter distance between producing and consuming games.
The question is, how do you innovate in that model? Because it's sort of how can that figure out something new, or can it only kind of figure out something that has been done before? So and that to me is on a philosophical sort of tangent as well. In sort of, we'll come to that later, but about the big companies, how they sit on massive data and sort of abilities to build models and generate things, and then we become passive consumers. But then how do we ensure that we can continue to innovate or actually just understand how things work? If we outsource everything to a GPT-3 model, will we even understand what grammar is in 50 years? Because it's all there.
You have and you can tie that back to the AI Act.
Yeah.
So how will you sort that out when you have a foundation model underneath your use case, right? But there is another spin on this angle. Do you guys know Embark Studios? The Swedish, quite newly started gaming studio. The CEO, founder is coming out of EA, I guess, or DICE. And basically, now we're talking about software 2.0, whatever you want to call it. How will we generate code in the future? And of course, the perfect example that you can find on YouTube is and he explains this really well, is like, okay, so how do you code a lizard to move across the screen? And then we have the whole thing, okay, the old way we really code everything, and we have a lot of coders, and they will make something happen. And then and now the new way, of what sort of Embark Studios is seeing, the concrete example where let's code the AI model of the joint sort of thing of how this lizard has movement, and then we let that model learn to walk like a baby, and then over time, based on the movement principles or designs, it then moves in a certain way. So here we go then to coding line by line everything, to basically explaining the parameters of the model, and then let the model train, and in this way generate movement as software. So I think this is also like, this is somewhere in between, right? We're having this complete stupid prompter and everything's done, and this is whole like, we will instruct a superset, and then we will learn and train on that, and that will generate software. What do you think?
I'm still looking forward to, whatever car, if it's Tesla or not, but at some point when it drives not in a way that I like it, I just tell it, "You're a stupid car. Can you please drive a bit faster, brake a bit harder, and then make sure that this horrific driver on the right get really harassed?" If I can speak to a car and just reprogram the parameters of it by speaking to it, it would be a nice thing.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, stupid example.
But this is a rabbit hole, of course.
No, but I think this is also like more of a almost software 3.0 thing. I mean, if you take the software 2.0, as Karpathy says, it's more like sending data to it, and you can learn how to do translations or understand images or whatnot. But I would almost argue that when starting to interact with it in natural language, that's more like software 3.0 in some way.
Maybe that's even next level again.
Interesting. So, your kids are still small, but what's your thought about would you still encourage your kids to take engineering courses, or what do you think the best way forward
Yes,
for them?
For sure. I would. I think just having the fundamentals in place is super valuable, and then I'm still a big believer in sort of the classic math, languages, what have you, and then sort of not specialize too early, and maybe specialize in something that, because the sake of interest more than application, and then you'll find something that's interesting that will fit that. So that's the philosophy that I will try to implant. But then again, if they want to do something completely different, I'm also fine with that, hopefully.
Awesome, sounds great.
Yeah.
If we just move from Katrineholm, what happens next after that?
Yeah, well, I realized that Katrineholm was maybe a bit too small to fulfill all my sort of ambitions, but more curiosity. So I left for Linköping, where I studied industrial engineering for a while.
Great university.
Great university, yeah.
If I may say
so. Met a lot of, I had did my military service in between that. I think everyone had to do that in those days. Met a lot of very sort of interesting people, and that sort of widened my horizons quite a lot. Still fell into the trap of becoming a consultant, because everyone should be that at some point.
You still call it a trap?
Well,
we were joking about it.
Yeah. It is a trap, because it's at least for someone who's curious and sort of thrives on doing something new on a regular basis, I think it is a trap.
Oh, you get your hit every day.
I get my hit, and it's sort of so well set up. So every point in your career when you feel like I know this and getting a bit bored, then there's something new that you can sort of dangle in front of you, so you stay on. It fits me very well, my personality and my curiosity and my sort of problem solving. Sort of the core of it is problem solving, and we're also has been, even way before big data, was very data driven in our approach. So it suits me well.
But this was in the beginning here when you went that way. Was it BCG from the beginning?
Yeah, I actually started at straight out of university. I started at Telia Sonera, or Telia at that time. I was there for a couple of years. I graduated, I think, in 2001. The .com bubble and telco bubble burst. So it wasn't any not happy days. but that was a great sort of learning, a great school. So I was there for a couple of years, and then I worked 1 year at Orc Software, now Itivity, sat in between the testing team and the product team. And the
Orc is trading.
Yeah, they do algo trading. It was cool stuff. They were building sort of bit level protocols between the servers to kind of shave a microsecond to be able to put an option price in the market quicker than, I mean, it was.
What do you think about this kind of high frequency trading markets?
I think now it's basically locked up the market quite a lot. At that time, it was quite immature. So if you were faster, you could earn a lot of money. I think what Orc Software did and is still doing under the name of Itivity is sort of that. But I think the main customer now is more market makers. That where you want to that you put prices in the market for someone to trade warrants. At that time, it was prop traders that wanted to just beat the market.
One thing is being successful in it. Another thing is the morality of it, and if companies or the market is. Oh, you said that with a big sign. Okay. Do you think it's beneficial for society to have high frequency trading in place? Some people claim it's good for regulate or basically
it's good for liquidity, and I think it's good for liquidity on a lot of sort of insurance-like instruments. Then, of course, it also can provide some sort of a lot of speculation because it's quite often the counterpart of speculation is some sort of algo trading software that puts the price in the market. So I think if it props up the sort of adds liquidity to the market that where you provide hedging and stuff, it's good. But I also think that some securities are probably just impossible to trade because you always I think also investors have taken a bit of a different view on how they trade. I think back at that time it was about beating the market. Now I think it's exit the sort of the growth stocks now, but I think now it's more back to fundamentals, which I think is sane in that sense.
But what I'm hearing between the lines is also it's like we need to separate algo trading, the technicality of algo trading, and what it's used for. And how you are sort of using it for good or using it to stabilize market or secure liquidity versus manipulating markets.
Yeah. And I think that back in that day, you could actually, I know not manipulate, but you could really earn a lot of money just by being fast, which a lot of people did. Now I think you can't because everyone is fast. So now it's more back to the sort of the intention from the beginning to kind of provide those, just automate the process of putting price in the market for a lot of sort of insurance.
And when you said Orc moves more and more towards working towards the market makers, in context, we're talking then about the Nasdaqs and the sort of
but also you could I mean a lot of people could put price in the market for just create warrants and register in the market and put prices on them. And then you typically have some sort of algo trading system behind that does that for you. Sort of takes a price.
So the market maker doesn't need to be.
They are the counterparts. If you so they put bid and ask in the market and they have a spread that they earn money on. And then it needs to be fast. It needed to be fast at that time because if you took too much time to calculate the option price, someone would kind of could do the arbitrage.
I'm glad to hear that you think that the future is fundamentals at least. I had some friends in the trading market, and they say fundamental are useless. It's only about technicals. But I hope and I believe that the future will be more about fundamentals. Right?
We'll see. Today is a bit hard to foresee.
It's hard to see where it's going.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So you were into some trading there at that time as well, and Telia, etc. And what happened after that?
And then, I mean, when I was in school, I had the intention, or at least the curiosity, to try out consulting. And then, sort of the market sort of opened up again. I applied to BCG and a number of other consultancies back in 2005. Got into BCG, and then I've stayed ever since.
It's a long time.
It's a long time. It's starting to, be many years. But it's time has been sort of flying in that sense. as I was 2 years in Stockholm, then I spent almost 3 years in Moscow, working in Moscow, Kiev, Kazakhstan, basically, and then moved back to Stockholm in 2010. Worked a lot in telco and high tech, and then go back 5-6 years. We started doing analytics, and then I was sort of the tech guy, so I got pulled into that. We didn't have BCG GAMMA at all in the Nordics then. We had, I think, one person, and I basically got the question sort of, do you want to build it in the Nordics? And so said yes.
So here we now go from BCG to BCG GAMMA.
Yeah.
What is GAMMA?
BCG GAMMA is the...
Perhaps we should start with what is BCG?
Yeah, we start
BCG
there. Actually better.
Is a classic strategy consulting, bit more than 50 years in the market, I think 60 maybe. Did from the beginning pure strategy, sort of telling companies sort of how to allocate capital, what should be your portfolio strategy, how do you work with pricing, and then did that for a long time and was very sharp but fairly small until we started saying, let's also help our clients implement that. That was sometime in the 90s or maybe mid 80s. Started growing a lot. So now it's basically a one-stop shop in that sense. We do everything from sort of M&A strategy down to very sort of shop floor operations in most industries. And then
how many employees are there at BCG now? Is it
globally? I think 25,000. I think there was 5 when I started. So we've been.
Was it 5? You said when you started, really?
Yeah,
so
when
we have a
strategy consultancy.
It was more pure strategy consulting, but we still did a lot of operations, and I think that was a misconception for a long time, and still is, that we only do strategy. I mean, we wouldn't have that big of a business if we only do strategy. Then you're invited in every 3-4 years. No, we have the full portfolio now, and work on all sorts of topics. Basically any topic that could show up in the exec team, work with them. So we have quite deep sort of expertise chapters in every functional area you could imagine.
Is there some speciality in type of sector or something else that
we cover most sectors. I would say all sectors. I would say then of course, depending on geography, we typically mirror the structure of that region in terms of industry. So we in the Nordics do a lot of industrials, consumer goods, forestry, finance, retail. So yeah.
Awesome. And you also spent some time in Moscow. Can you just go a bit into how did that come about, and how does working in Moscow separate or differs from Sweden perhaps, or US?
This was in 2007, so it was also a way back, but that was a bit of a time travel back in time in many senses. First of all, the consulting industry was very, very immature. So
in Moscow in that time,
yeah. So I think you had to explain to the clients quite often what they have bought and what we didn't do, and very top. Most companies were very sort of autocratic, so you had one guy or woman who called the shots. In Sweden, you need to convince a lot of people that your solution is the right thing. There you had to convince one person, and then that person put up a decree at the board and said, from now on we do like this. So it was a bit easier in that sense, but still you needed to do the.
But you're talking about decision culture here is very different in different parts of the world. Very
much so, yeah. But I think. And also, of course, we had 3 kinds of clients, sort of the old Soviet style companies that was extremely hard to work with, the new kind of companies that were started in the early 90s, fairly entrepreneurial, and then all the multinationals. I spent most of the time in 2 latter categories. So that was interesting.
Do you like Moscow as a city?
Yeah, I liked Moscow. I was that was at that time fairly rough in that sense. I mean, you could find very sort of exclusive spots, and at that time I think most Russians did their shopping in outdoor markets still, but then if you went to a sort of a food retailer, it was super expensive. But during those 3 years, that was also, remember the Lehman crash, so it was total handbrake on the economy, and then everything sort of started slowly coming back, and that the last year I spent there was the sort of the emergence of the mid segment, where actually people started to ask for some sort of value for money. So there was 3 very different years. Glowing hot economy first year, total handbrake, and then some sort of comeback. But I saw a lot of my Russian friends taking the decision to actually leave the country during these years, and shortly after, because of a bit of disillusion about where the country was heading, I made the same conclusion. So for me, the 3 year was enough. A lot of my friends were sort of heading back or leaving the country, and also a lot of Russians. So I felt like these are the people that should be here and try to sort of drive some sort of change from within. If they're not doing it, I might as well also leave. So, and then I started sort of, if you spend 3-4 years sort of away, you start losing a bit in touch with your friends and family. So to me, 3 years was good.
Was this before you had sort of family ties, so to speak?
I had family ties. That was what brought me there.
But you were there on your own. You were not there.
No,
with your
I moved there with my then girlfriend, so who was at the Foreign Office at that time.
Okay. So you then had to make that kind of choice. Do we want to establish ourselves more back in Sweden, where our family ties are, or do we become globetrotters or whatever?
Exactly. Yeah. It didn't last. So yeah.
Awesome. And then you continued back in Sweden as well. And at some point, what was the next step, or how did you get into GAMMA, etc.?
No, it was BCG sort of started doing analytics, and we sold a few projects here in the Nordics and started to doing that kind of co-work. We didn't have those competences here in Sweden or in the Nordics, so it was a lot of fly-ins, people traveling in every week, and we said, first of all, I had a lot of ideas about, and that at that time GAMMA was fairly sort of new and
What year are we speaking about here?
2017 maybe. Okay. Or late 16. And it was very biased to data science, not the other stuff we talked about before. It was all about getting the model right, and sort of making it work in the actual operations. And I had quite a lot of ideas of what sort of structures we needed to build around it. Having worked a bit with software development, I saw a few gaps in that sense, both on our side and for sure at the client side. So then we said we can't keep sort of flying these people in every week. We have a lot of business here. So we started building a team. Now I think we're around 35 somewhere in Nordics.
But you're speaking about GAMMA now, right?
Yeah, GAMMA. Yeah.
Can you just give a quick description of what BCG GAMMA is?
Yeah, it's the advanced analytics division of BCG. Started around, we had people doing that, but it's a separate career track, separate roles, separate sort of learning and development. But they're all consultants, so they're sort of client facing. But we employ data scientists, machine learning engineers, architects, UX designers. So sort of basically the full stack you need to build a solution. At that time, we were very, very heavily biased to data scientists purely. Yeah. But then we quickly realized that we need to have the full spectrum because our clients don't have it. And if we want to put anything into any sort of production and scale it, we need to help them.
This is actually a topic in itself, which is I think really important. Should we go there directly, or should we save it?
Oh, let's save it. Let's find.
So we have been we are on a quite rapid development journey. So it's mostly built in-house, organically recruited. We've done 2 minor acquisitions, one in Australia and one in Spain. Otherwise, it's organically grown.
You say Austria or Australia?
Australia. So we acquired the Simulation Group, which is They do, name tells you, they do sort of industrial simulations and sort of digital twins, work a lot in mining and ports and infrastructure, quite cool stuff. And then we acquired the market leader in Spain. Otherwise, we've grown organically. And we did have people that were data science profiles in BCG. They were typically, you can find them in risk, in finance, and a bit of pricing, but they were totally mangled in our career processes because no one really understood what they were doing. They were not properly evaluated, and then they left because they felt that this wasn't the place for them. So we said, okay, let's put a brand in the market that's different. Let's start having separate processes internally for how we recruit them, how we train them, how we staff them, how we evaluate them. So that was start of a pretty quick journey. So now we're somewhere around 2,000 people.
In Gamma.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's been quite a growth journey. And
how many in the Nordics?
We are somewhere short of 40, I think, in the Nordics.
Here in Stockholm mainly? Or?
No, we have Stockholm mainly, but we also have people in Helsinki, Copenhagen, and Oslo. It's been a big, I would say, a big shift for BCG as well as a company. I mean, we've disrupted ourselves in if you can say that, because I think there are areas now that are AI first or data first that we don't do it the old way at all, because it doesn't make sense, and some areas where we probably wouldn't have been able to continue to do it unless we had Gamma. So there's been an internal substitution of a lot of types of projects in pricing and marketing and supply chain planning that we do data driven every time now, or we don't do it because no one would buy it, the product we have had 7-8 years ago. So unless we had it, we would probably not do that at all. And that's transforming ourselves in the way we deliver, in the way we sell, but it's an ongoing journey. So the main model is time and material, but we also have built quite a lot of products that we're now starting to say,
and when you say products, give an example.
We have a full stack solution for custom value management, for example, that goes from acquisition through cross-sell, upsell, blah, blah, for all types of subscription businesses. Has the whole customer 360, it has the data science workbench, it has the campaign engine, it has the connectors to all the channels, it has all of that, but it doesn't have, we still see that there's still a lot of value in customization. So it's not a fully packaged product, but it's 80% packaged. And then
but you need to configure it for the context.
Yeah, you need to integrate the data into it. You need to you need to see what the data tells you. You need to make sure it works. You need to connect it to, so typically the model layer is fairly empty. But we have pre-integrations on the data side.
Have you marketed this yet a bit or not so much? Or?
Yeah, Deep AI it's called.
Deep AI. This is a Deep AI.
Yeah. And then we have together with KLM, we've developed an airport airline operations suite that predicts disruption in airline traffic, lets you reschedule stop times.
So you've done customer projects that you have together with the customer,
and then we commercialized it together with them. So we market it together with KLM to other airlines and other airports, and we do similar stuff in quite a lot of the intersections between topics and industry. So we have a suite of somewhere around, it's starting to be quite many now, but 10-15 real solutions.
Would you argue that those solutions has a sector industry use case type focus?
Most of them have, but for example, the Deep AI is for any subscription business, and then we have tailored it to bank and insurance, utilities, telco.
But the fundamental topic is end-to-end around subscription business.
Yeah, and that's totally new for us. I mean, we are used to charge for hours, and then now we have something where we invested a lot of money and time in IP. And then should we sell it as a product? So that's a lot of ongoing discussions internally. So, and that's I think the cool thing with BCG is that we're super entrepreneurial and we're quite inventive. So it's never stale, and you're actually allowed to do quite a lot of things And then so we let all flowers bloom a bit, and then we take a bit of time to see.
But I'm curious. Has this been? I can realize this must have been a lot of internal discussion on the fundamental strategy and position. Is this us? Is this our core?
Yeah.
And I think we have a mutual friend, Martin at Arundo, who was earlier at McKinsey. Yeah. And of course, this is an interesting topic that when you have a very fundamental business model, even the whole engagement model in the whole career ladder, it works, right? Yeah. It really works, right? And here now someone says, well, we can innovate and disrupt our own model in different ways. Yeah. That cannot be easy.
No, but it happens spontaneously in an organization where you have a lot of people who are driven and inventive and has drive. And also I think it's a natural, if we at first were a total sort of, we do something super custom for you only, but then the sort of 10th time we come to a customer saying, we've done this before, but for you, we will start from scratch. They're like, don't you have anything that you could reuse? Of course we have. So that became sort of, we couldn't come to clients saying
this is the game today. I mean, like
and then that actually happened spontaneously. Those teams who did that, they said, okay, let's just sort of take what we have, refactor it, generalize it, and then we use it as an internal sort of case accelerator accelerator for ourselves, and then that becomes more product-like, and then suddenly we have a product. So that for us is a natural sort of.
But you were super fast now to say something that I think is quite profound, that the way you do it is, of course, to optimize and make and productize the consulting engagement. And you can put the internal branding as an accelerator for something. Yeah. And now you're on the path of productization. And then if you continue that path, you get to a product all the way out to the customer. Yeah. Is that sort of the...
Yeah, exactly. That's how it goes. And then I think... we will still be a consulting company, so that's at our core.
And the argument why you still need to be a consulting company, I think, is quite clear, because you always need to tweak to the context, culture, situation of each individual company. Yeah. So something out of the box is not easy.
No, and I mean, our mantra has been from the start that we have a saying that we call 10-20-70, which is. Has been our mantra since we started, saying 10% is the algo, 20%, which I think is an understatement maybe, is the sort of the data infrastructure, and 70% of the effort is scaling and adoption. And that is actually change management, it's training people, it's changing the way the workflow, actually looking at how the algo and humans can interact and sort of find their place in this new process. I think a very common mistake is to say there's just so many pitfalls in this space. But I think quite often we see that clients have said, we tried this, it didn't work. Okay, what did you try? We tried to replace the whole process with a model. Okay, and it couldn't handle all the special cases. Okay, but maybe we can find a way where the model actually handles 70% of the cases and the humans do the rest. And then we tell the model why it couldn't sort of handle those, and over time it might pick that up. I mean, a super concrete case in supply chain planning where we did portfolio of a few thousand products. We found out that our demand forecasting was super accurate on 70% of the portfolio. It had problems with new products and phase-out products, typically, because new products, they were just taking biased decisions because they had an over-belief of the popularity of it. And the phase-out was typically someone just took a decision, it's like, now we stop selling it, and then you couldn't really forecast that. So, and then we said, but let's just redesign the whole planning process. So the model does what took you 4 weeks in a couple of hours. It produces very good forecasts. You pick those up, you can change them. We will recommend, we'll tell you what the confidence is, how well we performed historically, so it will guide you in that process, and then you spend all your time with those 30% that is really hard, where you need to talk to customers, you need to talk to the sort of account teams and what have you. Okay, but that's a new process. That has very little to do with the model. It has to do, it builds on the model's abilities, and then you fit the new process to what the model actually can and cannot do. Instead of saying, if the model can't handle all the cases, we don't like it. So and then
this is super good, very pedagogical the way you explain this, which I think is hardcore.
I see a lot of those examples.
And if I'm brutal now, in your experience, how many of your clients or in your projects is the client thinking and investing 10, 20, 70?
Very few.
Very few, right? So we are
the 10
here,
and maybe the 20.
Yeah, we think the 10, maybe the 2. I mean, like when we do the example we did before, right? Only the model we talked about, hiring data scientists, that's the 10. That's the 10. That's it. Then, I need a couple of data engineers and maybe some data quality that I thought was the biggest problem with AI Act. That's the 20. None of that is the 70.
Nope.
Right?
Nope.
And this is, I think, is like, how can we as an industry and as buyers reconcile with this simple fact?
Can't you productionize that as well? Is there a way to productionize change management?
Productize, you mean? Yeah, I mean we've done that in many ways, and I think you can drive that in many. Either you could say it has many levels. Part of that 70% change management is overall literacy that is getting much more people in the organization to understand how the data actually flows through their organization and how it drives decision and how they can and cannot use it better. And that's sort of a top level change management journey. And then there's a sort of a use case specific change management journey that is about rewiring how you take decisions. And I think the big value in analytics is decisions, it's not people. I quite often get that question, how many people will we save? And like, that's the order of magnitude sort of fewer than you will earn if you just start taking more decisions in a correct way. So and then also measuring adoption, because it's not a one-time thing. You could easily put in place, and we typically do that. For example, if we have a recommender system that recommends people in the business to take decisions in a certain way, we typically combine ML with optimization, because then you can sort of hardwire some of the changes you want into the rule set of the optimizer. So and then part of the change is also to keep accountability for the business decision. So then we might want to check how often do they override, how often do they accept the recommendation. At one client, we realized that they're not overriding anything. So they just checked out and said, well, let the model run. But we knew from the experiments that when they actually went in to look at the top sort of 100, 200 articles, they took better decisions because the model wasn't sort of at its best on the big ones. So we actually wanted them to override. So we monitored all the time after each run to say, are they active? Are they taking responsibility? And those who didn't, we went in and said, you should actually review these suggestions. And the same way we monitor, we typically put in place those kind of KPIs to actually monitor adoption. Right. How often do they change?
Very similar to different customers, and you can reuse that and have a similar kind of.
And that fuels the change journey. So there's a lot more to it than just sort of having an education. You need to put in place something to support it as well.
But this is why this also becomes such a multidisciplinary problem, right?
It does.
And where to go 360 around the 10, 20, 70 has a lot of different, quite deep skills in different areas.
So Gamma never works alone in that sense. Our teams are always multidisciplinary. Everything from the different disciplines we have, data scientists, data engineers, ML engineers, we call them AI software engineers, we think that's a better name, to business analysts, change experts. We require from the client side that they have a mirrored setup. They should sort of contribute with the same setup. They need to come in with domain experts. We like them to have the actual operators in the process we're working with in the team, so that if we work on a pricing tool, we have the merchants or the pricing managers in the team at least 1 or 2 days a week. because they are the ones that will be able to guide the team what's doable and not. Maybe we can widen their horizons to say that's actually doable. There's a give and take, and they are the actual users of this when we put it then into production. Because if you just have a sort of a requirement gathering phase and then you run off and do something and come back, they haven't been through the learning journey that sort of developing an AI application is. Because you learn so much from the experiments and what works and doesn't. You need to kind of look in deep into the data. What's the behavior of when the model hits the reality, and you build the feedback loops. If they haven't been part of that journey, there's just zero trust.
But this opens up two lines of questions or rabbit holes.
Yeah.
And I'm looking to you, Anders, to guide us if we should take him now. One question I had on my mind that you actually started answering now was how the collaboration works between Gamma and the rest of BCG. And you explained it. Okay, we have these core roles, but to go 10, 20, 70, that becomes a Gamma/BCG transformation project.
We preach what we pray in that sense. So we work in quite broad teams and want our clients to do that as well. And that's been an evolutionary journey. I think in the beginning, we didn't.
So then you can't be cats and dogs in the long run.
No, we can't. No, but I think we from the beginning, a lot of our clients didn't have any sizable sort of analytics teams. So then we did it for them, ran into quite painful handover processes. It's much more efficient to have shoulder to shoulder from the start, even if it's a small team on their side and bigger on our side. But then there's someone who has been along the journey. They also know that we tested 50 things that didn't work. So we pivoted a number of times. So if you hand over, typically what they do is that I don't like this. I'll start testing out the 50 things that we've already done. So it's much more powerful, and it's also much more cost effective to set up mixed team, including also their IT vendors quite often. So it's us, our clients. It could be IT vendors, other kinds of analytic consultants. So we have fairly open architecture in terms of teaming.
And how well do you think this is the mixed team topic? And now we have understood it, BCG GAMMA to BCG. How well do you think the client understand the importance of the mixed team? And when do they try to push you in business versus IT, typical or something like this?
Of course, for all sorts of reasons, they try to kind of box consultants into different boxes. Say we only have a category here that's management consultant, and then you have
this is IT. No, exactly. This is two different. This is the procurement category A. This is category B.
That we deal with. But I think the more acute problem is that the clients or the companies actually don't put mixed teams together.
No, they're not. So here we have the fundamental challenge that you are coming up and saying we need to do this. And when the client, and they need to scramble across 5-6 different teams to bring up something virtual that has no real mandate, has no real governance, has no real metrics.
Yeah.
Is that fair? To be a little bit
part of exactly challenge? How it works. So and that what we try to put in place when we work with clients is to kind of either build those virtual teams or actually quite often help them to go into what we call product or platform organizations, where you actually organize according to products that enable certain parts of the process.
Now you did the segue to I said I had two lines of questions.
Yeah.
So the first line of question was
great minds.
A great mind think alike. I steal yours.
Yeah.
Mixed teams, and that we are fundamentally not organized like that. You figure that out. But the client needs to figure that out, not only for the project, but long term. And then you come to the second one. What you're describing when you're describing sort of continuity, working close, shaping, we are talking about product thinking over project thinking.
Yes. Yeah.
Hardcore.
Very much so. Yeah.
Can you elaborate?
That's project over product is a very good term, because very often companies think in projects, they resource according to projects, and then a project has an end. Then you put something into maintenance mode, and then someone should sort of look after something. And then you go back to your different silos, and then things start to fall through the cracks. We see that quite often. The result of, in many of our engagement, actually, they've managed to keep together the product team that was set up, and they then become the agile product team that runs the process, not just the model or data, that they actually become as a cross-functional team consisting of maybe a data scientists on sort of part-time, because you don't need them all the time. If you're not in sort of heavy development mode, maybe a data analyst, and then for an example coming out of Deep AI, which is the customer value management, typical squad that's the result of that is campaign managers, marketeers, sort of someone who defines the sort of the content modules, data scientists and data analysts. They work as a team driving marketing campaigns to drive acquisitions. They are the new marketing team. Then you can choose to kind of split out some of the more technical roles in an enabling product team, but that's the new team. You don't go back to saying, we go back to marketing and do whatever we used to do before, and you go back to analytics and you can go back to IT, and then that's a recipe for disaster. And then you spend all this time to build something that works, and then it falls apart because you go back to your old ways of working.
Awesome.
So yeah,
awesome summarized and explained.
Should we continue on this theme for a bit? I'm eager to go to
it sounds easy when I say it. It's not easy at all.
This is the core problem to some degrees, I think.
Yeah.
That we are not getting this organizational change. What comes out after this? Please, I think.
One question then, and you already started to speak about that, and you said something that I think is interesting. You said AI software engineer, and as opposed to like ML engineer or whatever term you want to use. How would you say that the difference is between traditional software engineering and more AI-based software engineering? Is there some kind of fundamental difference there?
Yeah, I think it is not. I'm not a software engineer myself, so I might not have all the details. But I think just the nature of how those projects typically run, and that you don't have all the answers when you embark on a software engineering project either. But even less so in this. So you it has to be data centric. You need to kind of also look at what the data tells you and shape the solution according to that. You need to be able to handle imperfections and sort of limitations in data and make something pragmatic out of that. A software development process is fairly deterministic, whereas this is not. So I think the mindset is very, very different. And then if you look the last 5, 6, 7 years, I think that just the tool landscape has been more immature. So you've been forced to be a bit more sort of a jack of all trades to be a really good software engineer.
We had a professor in software engineering here before called Jan Bosch, and he also he I think coined the term AI engineer, and he spoke a lot about the difference between the engineering of traditional software and AI software, and he actually says very similar to what you did, that AI engineering is much more data centric, and you really don't know if anything will work until you try it on the data you actually do have, and if it does have the predictive power that is required. So therefore, it is not as deterministic as you say.
No,
you have to be more experimental, exploratory.
Yeah,
right?
And experimental in several steps. I thought first you need to see if it technically sort of has any predictive power, and then we typically put it into real life very quickly to see how it works when that meets reality. Can we and that then it's super duct taped it and all the manual processes behind it. We just need to get it out in reality. Could be, do recommendations actually work, or how do internal decision makers react when we put it in front of them? Is something they don't like, don't understand? Do we need to adjust? So really put something in front of the actual user or the consumer or whoever will use it.
So quickly go to the end product and iterate quickly.
And then use that as a driver for the design process as well. And then, that's a super good way of showing a bit of money as well. I mean, if you, in pricing and marketing, you can actually, you can show that it will have an impact on the bottom line or the top line, and that typically gets the attention of the stakeholders.
So first validating technically the model or the data is actually useful. Then very fast going from validating the model to validating the business viability. We still don't have something really automated or industrialized or anything
Not at all,
that.
no.
But we truly want to have business viability confirmed.
Yeah.
And now we have then we can get real metrics to commit to invest for the next stage.
Exactly.
Then if I may be a bit more controversial, I think we are agreeing too much, all of us, and that's potentially a good thing, but just to try to say a bit more controversial things. You said something about putting in production quickly and getting the real value for it and then iterating and getting that quickly. What is the value of doing...
Not in production.
Oh, okay.
In reality. You need to put it out in... the first version you put out in front of customers it has basically no automation in there. It might be totally manual, all the process behind it. You just
so it's
test it out if it works.
It's not integrated to the data flows in whatever system you have.
Maybe, but not in any nice way or
so
form.
It's like
it's basically you have a semi-manual version of your pipeline that puts out predictions. The delivery form to the users could be Excel. It just gets something out there. And then I've learned that you should be careful to put ugly stuff in front of customers or consumers or internal customers because they confuse the UI with the model.
Yes.
So actually, funny thing. So we have been running a project for a long time in pricing in retail. Weekly price updates, everyone liked it, and then we updated the UI and then said this new model is much better than the old one. Like we didn't touch the model, but it looks nicer. So
packaging is
sometimes overlooked.
But Andreas, did I get it right? First, you want to validate the pure model.
Yeah.
This is very technical, almost like headless, whatever, for the experts.
Yeah.
Then what you want to do, you want to validate the usability or the user experience. Yeah. Then when you get that commitment that this will actually work in a workflow and they can actually make decisions like this, then we go to the next level of industrial.
Yeah, because I think very few will commit to the investments you need to do in automation or actually the change management. So if it doesn't work technically and we can't prove the results in a very small pilot, why should we throw everything we do up in the air and start doing things differently? So I think you need to have a couple of proof points to convince different kinds of stakeholders to actually start things, put things in motion and put money behind it.
If we speak a bit about difference in amount of work here, one thing is of course to build a prototype that either just test the model or what the data's pretty power is. Versus something that has, I think what you mean, worked in real life in some way, some kind of MVP. It's not fully integrated, it's not working in production, but it has a first real life sense in some way. Then you put it in production. Then potentially, just having the product development is one thing. And you can speak about organizational development, change management, blah, blah. If you try to put some kind of weights on how much time is necessary for doing the prototype, some kind of real life evaluation, production, organizational development, change management.
I would say that timeline has accelerated a bit because companies get better at having data available and those kind of things. So the starting point has moved quite a lot and go back a couple of years. I think you typically had to do quite a lot of work on the infrastructure and so the actual platform to put things in place. Now quite a lot have that in place, so that accelerates a lot. But the proof of concept, depending on starting point, from weeks to maybe a month or something. But then we have a team working full time on it. Typically try to get it out in reality, try it in front of users or have some sort of consumer testing in sort of 8 to 12 weeks. Then the MVP, then how long that take is, I think, is a bit depending on the context of how big is the company, do they operate in many markets, do we have different data sources per market, do they have, some companies have 20 different ERP systems and how come, is the data different, or can we do we need to rebuild it, or can we just plug and play? So then those things, but an MVP 4 or 5 months maybe, including the first phase.
Yeah.
And then the scaling is a function, I think, of the scale of the company.
But our
journey is the change management starts in the MVP phase already. Okay. I mean, it's not something you do at the end. Yeah. You start doing that because you learn a lot in these experiments, and the people who are part of the start typically become change ambassadors that can also tell the story. And so you need to have people that will sort of follow through to the end. Quite early in
but you can get some ambassadors or some evangelists that are happy and eager people that early bird kind of adopters to it. But to actually have a full scaling throughout an organization, at least for a large part of it, wouldn't that take quite some time then?
Yeah, it also depends on the nature of the decision. Some decisions in companies are fairly big ones. They're taken on a weekly or monthly basis by a set of 10 people. But some decisions are taken in a very sort of super
Russian style.
Yeah, but depends on the process. Whereas maybe pricing decisions are taken by each store across the world. So the change effort there is massive because you need to change the behavior of thousands of people. So then we start talk, and then you need to set up an infrastructure for that. Sort of how do we train those people? How do you drive that? How do we keep the momentum? How do we measure? How do we do introductions? How do we make sure that this is a part of the onboarding? I mean, that has many dimensions. But I mean, the favorite, if you would start a portfolio of use cases, and we've done that a couple of times, it typically takes something that has a good deal of money attached to it, where the decisions are fairly centralized, because then the change journey is maybe changing the behavior of 10 people instead of changing the behavior of 500. So you need also to be a bit strategic when you define the roadmap of things you do and how you do them.
Yeah.
I have do you want to continue on something, or otherwise I have a tangent question. It goes in this is close to where we are, but it goes out on a tangent now. And I would like to hear Andreas' view on, or what you're meeting out in the marketplace in relation to when these projects or programs comes up with clients. What is the type of organization that is sort of you're meeting and sponsoring? Are you meeting a sort of an AI center of excellence? Are you meeting like a central team? Are you meeting a business unit head who has great ideas? Or is it all, is it completely random? Or do you see any patterns in how mid-sized logical companies want to engage? How is it started? Where does the traction start?
I think we as a company need to engage quite a lot of people to get something going. Typically, we need to have the sponsorship of someone who owns the results, basically on the business side. But we will need to work together with the center of excellence or the AI team or the data team. So we typically need to convince them as well, and they need to think that
And it's not the same.
Yeah, no, and then
P&L owner versus
exactly
competence owner,
and they need to find it exciting to work together with us. So we typically meet a host of people to get something going. We sell on value, so we typically sell to the one who actually owns the results.
Good answer.
Awesome. I have one more question I'd like to get in there before we go to Valideo, at least. And that is, I guess, for a company that wants to get started with data science in some way, get a bit more data-driven or AI-driven, or even data first or AI first at some point. There are many ways to start doing that. Of course, one way, and I guess you would say a good way, is to start talking to BCG. But then you can think also, at some point they need to have that as a core part of their business as well. And they need to build up skills themselves in having data scientists and ML engineer or AI software engineers or whatnot.
To rub shoulders.
Yeah.
And then you can think about different ways to start doing that. One would be to just have data scientists in their existing product teams or whatever teams they do have. Another way would be to start having more centralized teams that start to build up some core competence in how to work with data or build models or whatnot, or some kind of hybrid version of that. Do you have any thoughts about what is the proper way for a company to get started to become more data driven besides contacting BCG?
The pattern we've seen that has worked fairly well is to, at least when you start, to have a central team, just because if you distribute too much, there will be the odd birds in being misunderstood and sort of subscale. And so typically starting off with a central team, and depending on the size, sort of having that go to a sort of hub and spoke model typically, because you need at some point to get close to the business. Either you have a sort of a domain divided central team, but you have clear stakeholders that you work towards, or you actually locate those out to the hubs. So also that typically happens spontaneously, because if you have a total central team, the divisions or BAs, business areas or whatever, will start hiring their own teams anyways, because they don't think that they get the service they deserve. So I think at some point that will happen sort of spontaneously. But I think the central team has a number of functions. It can set the career model and the competence model. It can set sort of standards and policies and how you should work. It could take some decisions on architecture and infrastructure, so you don't do stupid things and sort of build yourself redo everything. And then typically that team becomes more of a gatekeeper, sort of, or enabler to the hubs where the actual the action happens. That's one model. Then depending a bit on industry, I mean, a lot of industries have very quantitative data-driven parts. I mean, telco, you have the churn team has always been data-driven. In banking and insurance, you have the pricing and risk teams. They're super quantitative. So if you have that sort of starting point, that's typically where it starts, and then it sort of builds out of there. So depending on company, you have different starting points. And then in data-driven overall, I think it's much more than AI. I mean, I think that's just to start getting some sort of curiosity around the dynamics of your business in a data-driven way in management team meetings. I mean, how do you look at your business? Do you look at it in a data-driven way? Are you curious? Do you have can you double-click on a report and get sort of the different views? What kind of questions do you ask? How do you react on things that look odd? Do you kind of take? I mean, that's that whole thing is
subjective, and
yeah, exactly, and sort of that. But that's a part of the bigger sort of data-driven journey. I think that's sort of what kind of question gets asked in business review meetings. What kind of questions get asked before you start doing something? Do you look at your sort of customer and sales data on a daily basis and adjust your assortment and marketing? How connected is your business around data? And that's, to me, more of a cultural journey. And of course, the maturity of your leadership.
It's a bit frustrating, I must say, because I think both Henrik and me and you agree far too much on this. I was hoping to find something to argue against, but speaking about the hub and spoke model, starting with the central part, then building up the spokes. I mean,
I think that's
the pattern.
It's not rocket science. It's like now, what seems to work?
Yeah,
trial and error. Good projects, bad projects. Inside a large organization, you have seen different patterns in the same organization. Or as a consultant, you see patterns all over the place.
Yeah.
And there are some fundamental patterns that reemerges.
So, I mean, of course, really great to hear that you also think this is so good. It wasn't meant as something negative. It's really great to hear that you think this is a good
I have
way
something that might be too controversial, a bit controversial to people in the practice. I think that way too many companies hire people that are interested in doing research, and way too few people that are interested in driving impact. And then you have a lot of discussions internally. Should we do this? That is more sort of research oriented, and that typically doesn't evoke a lot of enthusiasm from the business side because they don't see the value of it. Versus doing something that's maybe a bit more low tech and not as sexy, but it drives value tomorrow. So I think that's an internal struggle, and I can see that sometimes you go into analytics teams where everyone wants to do research, but they are in a company, they're there to actually deliver value. if they don't want to do research, there are other places for that. So I think that's a pattern that also I have seen. I think is changing, but I mean, most companies don't pay for.
But this is a bigger topic, and this is
I think the profile of people, or the how they explain the mission.
But let me use this as a segue into a topic I think Anders will like, because we are ultimately then thinking and talking about how we understand innovation, and ultimately how we understand incremental innovation versus more moonshot innovation, perhaps. And what is the right mix and understanding of how to innovate? I would argue that researchers think they're super valuable because they're doing moonshot stuff. Yeah. And if you're cynical, I never seen any dollars out of the moonshot, so I rather do this incremental stuff, low tech. But isn't that what this is all about? Also to find the right balance.
Yeah, it's a portfolio management question in terms of what projects you actually deploy. But I think. At least in the early days, there was a lot. I mean, we got questions on recruiting when it's like, do you do deep learning? It's like, not if we don't have to. So we're fine with the basic stuff as long as it works, and typically more robust. And we got a lot of disappointed faces in those events. But I think the realization that given the starting point in many companies, you can get very far with fairly simple sort of techniques. And if you don't find that interesting, I mean, maybe you should do something else, because I think building you need to build some sort of trust and sort of pull from the business. And unless you have at least a fairly big chunk of your portfolio projects that actually show value pretty quickly, I think the business rightfully will start questioning what you're doing. And I mean, product R&D for sure, you might come up with something in sort of 5 years for the next tech generation. But I think in data analytics teams, that has been the situation, in my view, in many cases, that they spent far too much effort on what the team think is interesting versus what the business actually needs. Now.
Okay, let me then try to. I'm trying to find something that we may disagree on, but it seems hard.
Okay,
let me try once then. What you just said as well is, what should really drive engineering or development? Should it be the business needs, or should it be something else what the team thinks? I would argue that it's dangerous that if you have only needs-driven development. I will also argue that it's dangerous if you only have tech-driven development. So then the obvious thing would be that you have a hybrid of both tech and needs-driven development. Would you agree?
Should I agree or should I disagree now? No, of course. I think
you're not seeking an argument. You're seeking consensus.
I think the problem if you only have a needs-driven thing is the needs will be very naive in that sense, because no one has sort of opened up the horizons of possibilities for you. So I think what the list you get is either super moonshots where people wanted to do some big brain that will run the business for them and have a crystal ball, or things that they could sort of that are super naive in that sense, and sort of quite often also focused on efficiency over effectiveness. That I think is quite a misunderstanding. People want to sort of find more efficiency in processes and sort of, can we automate rather than taking better decisions? That's the typical needs you get out of if I'm blunt. Yeah. So I think you need to find a way where the analytics team or data team can explain to the business or inspire the business to kind of what's possible, and the business then say, well, I actually need this and this actually, but I don't really know what it is, so can we explore it together? But I think that process is still not in place in many businesses.
But I think this goes a little bit back to what we talked about before, the imperative of product thinking, and the imperative, even more important, about the mixed team.
Yeah.
Because as long as we have the data scientist domain to the left, and we have the business domain know-how to the right, and we don't understand this as a Venn diagram where the new company will live in the intersection.
Yeah.
We will constantly work on this business to data translation topic, right? Or we will not understand the art of possible. And you can argue, you need to be data literate. I've been to conferences and say, you know what? Data scientist needs to be business literate. And somewhere the answer is then, if you go towards the mixed team and you have new perspectives on the same problems, that's how you innovate with value, in my opinion. Otherwise, these guys will do moonshot approaches that don't really understand how it relates to value. And these guys in the domain cannot cook up what could be done.
No, I agree.
Isn't that
I agree.
It boils back to this. That's why we need mixed teams, sort of, right?
Yep. At least when you've set, but at some time you need to define where you also set up those mixed teams, because very few organizations operate in that set as a default. As a default, we are strong believers in that sort of product platform organization, but it's a very long journey. It's a long way for many companies.
But you need to construct that environment for the success of for value creation.
I agree.
Somewhere.
Before we run out of time, we need to also move into Validio.
Let's talk Validio.
Can you just talk a bit more? How did you get in contact with them? Why did you choose to engage as a board member for Validio? And what is Validio?
Let's start with what it is. Validio is a platform for data quality and data observability. It's super cool. It's easy to use, and it's very, very scalable. They've been doing a super work in building a backend that's insanely scalable. And
based, I guess, on some kind of cloud provider.
Yeah, but you can also deploy it on your own cloud. So it's in that way you can it doesn't impact your own latency in that sense that much. So I actually tried to recruit both Patrick and Urban back in the days, but they were always busy.
Patrick is this CEO, right?
Patrick, CEO and co-founder, and Urban is head of R&D and co-founder. They showed up at a number of our recruiting events. Patrick is always quite sort of forward-leaning and wanted to discuss, and we said we should recruit those guys. But they were always busy with some side project that they didn't want to disclose what that was all about. So we had a discussion in over a year's time, tried to get them to do an internship, but they were busy. And then 1.5 years back, Patrick reached out and said, hey, we're launching this thing. We got first sort of injection of money. Maybe you want to be a part of that. And BCG has actually been quite restrictive in how you can engage in board positions. They opened up a couple of years.
Did you join them privately or more as?
No, it's privately. So BCG is quite restrictive on how you can engage in board positions, but we opened that up a few years back. So it's a bit more liberal now, which I'm happy for. So I've been in the board from almost the start. It's super fun. I think there were 3 employees when I started, so it's fairly operational. But now the team is doing a great job. Took in new money now before the summer, so now I have a growth ambition, both to put the product in place and get the commercials going. Two handfuls of initial customers, and then so very good feedback. So I'm super excited about that. And I mean, I was impressed by Urban and Patrick. That's why I sort of joined the journey.
Did you choose to? I mean, you already said you have big faith in both Patrick and Urban. So I guess it's more about the people than the tech, or how do you choose to engage in the company?
I think it was. Patrick gave me a brief of the technical idea and what they had built, and at that time, I mean, everything we talked about is sort of you need that data is the sort of the big overlooked topic in AI. So I said this is going to become something. It's a category that sort of didn't really exist or doesn't really exist. So there's a few companies operating in that niche, but it's all fairly new. So I think this could be something really interesting to be part of. It will be additive to my work as a consultant. I can dip my toes into a new ecosystem and get insights from that. And I can hopefully provide some guidance both on the sort of where does this fit into the overall journey, but also I worked for 18 years. So also how do you build a team and how do you
and also where does the product fit in the larger context of the industry?
Yeah, and that I think that landscape is still forming. So I think it's also a bit up to us.
How would you shape or frame today the USP of Validio? What's their angle here?
The big angle, there's like 4 USPs, I would say. One is that they operate not only on metadata, they operate on the actual data in the pipeline. So you could set up all sorts of statistical tests on the actual data. So you could detect anomalies, and you could find out what you can also partition data on all sorts of ways. So in real time. So it's not only batch, it's real time.
So the real problem you are solving is to get a better grasp of your like a health check or whatever you would call
and
it.
also provides a lot of insight on your data. It's massively scalable, and it's also very simple to set up. It has all those sorts of wizards. You can deploy it and it pops up and you say click yes. So the aim is to become the data engineer team's best friend. So
okay, you had 4 USBs. I'm still waiting for.
It wasn't that 4. The actual data versus metadata. Yes. It's super scalable. It's very easy to set up, and also non-intrusive. You can deploy it on your own cloud as well.
And there are so many different terms that are. We can see Validio here, perhaps. There are so many different job roles that get spoken about these days, and you mentioned a number of them, like. I guess ML engineer, etc. But there's a lot of ops terms. You can be a DevOps, you can be an ML ops. I guess you can be data ops as well. This to me sounds like more of a data ops kind of product. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that this will support the data ops. It could be the backbone of a data ops team because it monitors everything you have on the data. It also it could do everything from CSV files to all these UC connectors. So, and you can from out of the box let the system set up all those smart thresholds, and then you can learn over time how your data behaves and sort of tune those according to your own needs. So it's very quick to sort of get the grasp of all your data, and then you can over time sort of learn about how it.
Continue.
So yeah, data ops. I think all of those are actually. To me, it's DevOps is the basic term, and then it's applied to the ML pipeline or the data pipeline, depending on. So in that sense,
I'm trying to coming in now, learning about Validio. I'm trying to position it like, okay, we had if we talk to data engineer gurus like Lale, he would always highlight the importance of workflow orchestration, data pipeline orchestration, Airflow, Glue, those type of technologies, which is sort of very much at the center of the data ops setup at scale. How would you position what Validio does in relation to this? It's not the same. I understand that.
No, it doesn't have it's not the orchestrator that as Airflow would be. There's more the monitoring and sort of telling you that something is wrong. Then, of course, from that core, you could. There's a number of paths.
It's wrong on a way deeper level.
Because it's on a very deep level. And a lot of the customers actually using it for insights about their own data and sort of then drawing conclusions about their business operations from that as well. Because, and that's the cool thing. It's fairly generic in that sense. So I don't think we have figured out all the different use cases for it.
Thinking about that.
So I'm constantly telling Patrick and the team that we need to learn together with the clients sort of all the different ways of using it because it's so versatile. So
when you understand what it means to have this insight and on the data, what can you apply it to? Yeah, it's quite interesting.
No, I'm super thrilled. So it's but we're on a journey. It's the early days, but very fun to be part of.
And I read somewhere Zlatan is part of the team. Is that true?
I think he invested in the last round a small share.
That was the joke.
That's a big thing.
Yeah,
I think this is super cool. Just in itself, that is super cool.
I think he's listed as Unknown AB. It's his investment vehicle.
Yeah, really? It's called Unknown AB.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Now we know.
Now you know.
Yeah, very known person that is unknown. Awesome. What do you think? Okay, you're rather active, I guess, in Validio.
I'm in the board, so most of the things happen in the operational team. I sit in the board. We have frequent meetings, and then I'm of course. I mean, it's a small company, so there's like the board is more a sort of a coaching board than a proper board in that sense. So I try to be as helpful as I can. Yeah.
But maybe that's a good question in itself. Tangent again, like for any startup or, how to think about getting a board, and especially if you want to be a VC, you're 2, 3, 4, 5 guys. Validio has done it in one way. And you have, because you have seen so much also from how to think about getting a board when you are sort of young.
No, I must say I'm not super experienced in startups, but we discussed a long time in Validio sort of, do we even need a board? Because and when do we need the board? What should the board do in the early stages? And when we're like 3 or 4 employees, it's more then you're more of a coach to the CEO. But Patrick is really good at that. He's also built up a fairly big network of advisors that he connects with on certain topics. So I might be not needed so in a short while, but no, he's really active in the wider sort of startup community in sort of finding people that he trusts and they give him advice, that people have been through one or two sort of journeys. That sense.
But thinking then for a small startup like Validio, you of course wanted to scale, I guess, and one very hard and I think one of the most difficult questions, but most important question is recruitment. And then thinking about mixed teams and thinking about a small startup, what would be your advice for what type of roles to hire and recruit for startups like Validio? Any do's and don'ts for what type of skills to recruit? You can think like
if it's a tech. I mean, if it's a tech startup, I think you need to have a good mix between seniority. It's good to have people who've done it before and can say, "Wow, my previous place we did all these mistakes. If I could do it again, I would do it like this." That have seen a bit, and that we have. So we have everything from fairly junior to very senior in terms of experience, which I think is really good. You need to someone that sort of owns the product in that sense, really, and in this case it's been Patrick and then Chris. Fairly, and then when you have a product, now we're full on commercial. I mean, the best products doesn't sell themselves. I mean, you need to fairly quickly, when a product that actually works and have a good fit, you need to work really hard on commercials, and that's where we're investing the most now.
So just take the Elon Musk approach on this.
But I think that really important as well to think about, and we've been discussing that a lot, is sort of the initial set of people that you recruit will also define the culture in the company. Yes. So you need to think about finding people that will become your future team leads and leads, because they most probably will be. Some are pure specialists and they don't want to become team leads, but I mean, typically you grow with the company, you become more senior. So finding people that will become really good culture bearers in 5 years' time has been a lot of discussions around that in the board. And then at some point start to find roles. I mean, I think we're 25 somewhere now. Find people that can offload the CEO, because in founder-led companies, the CEO gets to do everything. So I think find a head of people, sort of chief of staff kind of person. Find the key roles that can drive the core processes is super important. Otherwise, you'll have a CEO that does everything. And at some point, they need to kind of let go of that anyways. And I think it's good that you have then sort of established a model that you can work according. So speaking of I'm speaking from very little experience, being most of the kind of discussions we've had in Validio, but I think also looking in the larger tech space in Stockholm, I think there's been a couple of journeys, and I think they've all sort of come to the point where you need to scale. And if you've done things wrong in the early days, they start to hurt.
Yeah. Just continuing a discussion about the product versus sales. And I think most would agree that you need to have sales as well. Then you have the Elon Musks of the world that don't even have a marketing department. What do you think about that?
I don't think we're there yet, but yeah.
No. Do you think? What do you think? Does it depend on the product, or can people just by having an extravagant like personality like Elon Musk, then he can basically sell by being so public as he is, or what do you think about?
If we speak about him specifically, he's done it a couple of times, so it didn't come out of nowhere. He's done a couple of journeys, and he's something to sort of that has built his fame, and then he's a weird mix of I think very introverted person that then when he goes on social media becomes sort of
social media monster.
Yeah, but he's playing. Well, I think the jury is still out if it will be successful or not. I think he will learn a few lessons in this process.
Mean the Twitter part? Or?
Yeah, but also, he's also quite outspoken on a lot of questions. It can hit back. But I think if you're a small company with a new product and sort of
unknown people,
you need to have marketing, and if that marketing is sort of community based or sort of thought leadership based or sort of pure digital marketing to get out there, I think you need to probably combine those levers. We have set up something that we call Heroes of Data. That is more of we help data teams connect. So we provide the meeting space and they share stories, and it's been very successful. They get signed up very quickly.
And just to close off the recruitment topic a bit, I'm not sure how much recruitment or interviewing you've done yourself. But
a lot. Yeah.
A lot. Yeah. Do you have any interviewing tips, or what do you actually look for when you interview a person?
The way that BCG and BCG GAMMA does it, GAMMA did basically copied the model from BCG in certain ways. First of all, we let sort of talent is a good way to recruit talent. So we use peer-to-peer and sort of to find talent, and quite a lot of intelligence that goes into that. We let our consultants interview the coming consultants. That's a good sort of two-way due diligence, because then we get the feel for, is this someone I could imagine working with? And they also get to say the same question, sort of, is this company for me? Are the people are they nice? Do I like them? Are they sympathetic?
Do I want to work with them?
Do I work with them? So don't forget, it's a two-way process. And I think you should sell, but you should also interview in that sense. When I interview personally, we do case interviews. So you typically start off with a bit of sort of who are you, and then you do a problem solving case. And then I want questions. I don't want to be the one who drives the dialogue. I want someone who goes in there is curious about who am I, who are we as BCG. In the case process, I want someone to actually guide me through the case rather than I ask all the questions. Right. So and then you fairly quickly realize sort of, are they asking the right questions or intelligent questions or questions with some thought behind it? And is it genuine curiosity, or is it just a list of questions that you notice that. So I want someone who I basically want an interesting interview.
But this is interesting now, because in your recruitment philosophy and technique, it's on the one hand side how you set it up, but you have you are very much also thinking about and evaluating how they are tackling this.
Very much so.
And this is maybe even more important.
Of course, you can't be super off on the answer, but no. It should be. But
a good answer with no questions is a red mark as well.
Yeah. It's actually at least less impressive than a very kind of structured approach, and then you might get something wrong in the end. And then I also look for genuine curiosity. I think that's a good driver for anything. If you're curious, you will have a bit of a sort of drive to improve. You kind of typically curious about other people, curious about topics, and then we look for a certain sense of competitiveness as well. You need that.
How do you find that? How do you find the competitiveness? What do you look for there?
Look for past achievements, and we can look at grades as well. Of course, and what they've done on this, have they only done sort of aced all the tests in school, or have they had an active life on the side, but at the same time been able to kind of be fairly good at in school? So we'll look for people who have sort of not one dimension in that sense. So they should, because we were consultants, we work with people. So if we send out a team, they need to be able to kind of connect and work together well with our clients. And that's what clients will remember, if there was a nice team that they had fun with.
So for you, it's very obvious that, good communication skills and attitude is very important.
Very much so, yeah.
But I would argue that even for companies that are not consultants, that is more important than people think.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, sure.
I even heard once, some podcast about, some very, very senior developer, and he was asked the question, who is the best developer in general? And someone would think, this person, he knew everything about databases, he knew everything about front end, blah, blah. No, he said, doesn't matter at all. I have a single ingredient that I identify as the best developer, and that is the one that can communicate. The one that can speak to the rest of the team and make them actually connect and work together.
Yeah.
That is the person that will become the most productive and make the team succeed.
I agree.
I very much believe in this as well.
And I think a lot. I mean, in internal company culture, I think a lot of conflicts and unnecessary noise and come out of pure communication. I mean, also in relationships. But I mean, overall, I think communication is underrated.
Yes.
And even more so, I think it's important in the data science data space, because we typically, I think a lot of people are more naturally inclined introverts, me including.
Yes.
And I think the standout capability is if you're a good communicator, and if you can communicate with extroverts and explain the complexities in a very simple way, so that you don't underplay the complexities. You get them to understand that's super complex, but in a very simple way, so they become curious about it. And we have a lot of those. Some are real good storytellers, and it's quite cool to see them. I mean, they're sort of scientist level data scientists, but they can really talk to laymen about what they're doing without losing the complexity and the sort of impressing people about what we're doing. So that's super cool to see. I'm not that deep, so I can only talk about the high level stuff.
And then another one. Do you have any thoughts on recruiting team members versus team leaders versus leaders of other leaders?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah.
Well, are we looking for the same, or are we starting to look for different things?
I mean, the success factors in those roles are very different.
Yeah.
Then I think, we have the typical consulting ladder. So you typically lead people that are doing the work you used to do, which is, it has its pros and cons, because, but in Gamma we also have the expert track which is less articulated leadership roles, and more you can spend more time on each step and become an expert in certain topics. So it's, and we have that in BCG as well. But regardless, as you advance to become more experienced, and you're expected to take a leadership role, you still are in the lead of roles that are doing what you used to do. So you have a very good understanding of what the roles you're leading are doing. So you can also guide them. You can see when something doesn't work or someone's struggling, so you can coach them. But that's very specific for a consulting organization, where I think
you have the ladder.
Where you have the ladder.
Or actually, it follows the ladder principle, which you can find in other areas, but it's one logic.
But leaders of leaders, I think, is a very different leadership role, because then it's all about, depending on what type of leadership or leadership team, sometimes that's sort of the whole team wants your role. So it's about sort of creating some sort of the duality of creating a bit of competition, so you get performance versus creating a team that actually can collaborate. So I think those kind of leaders, I mean, those are the leaders that typically end up as high executives that can lead leaders, in my view, that do them well.
And just to close off this line of thought, does this change what we need to recruit in our team leads or leaders when we go into mixed teams and where there is no way in hell that you can be guiding and coaching in all different disciplines? But you can
change, yeah.
You know, how do we? What do we look for then?
Then I think we look for someone who has at least a basic understanding of what goes on in different disciplines, but not deep. And I think also there needs to be a clear understanding within that team that team leader will not be the one that will challenge you on details. That's either up to you, or maybe you might have someone else that sits in a different dimension that is sort of the deep scientist or something. But that's the person that keeps the team aligned on priorities so that we don't start diverging. I mean, super practical. If you have a product owner that keeps, or we typically combine the Scrum and product owner because
we do too.
And that's the person that actually tells people, or that gets the team to agree on this is what we do in the next sort of cycle, in the next sprint. This is what we don't do. Keep track of that so that we are all driving towards the same goal. That's the key role of that person. And I think keeping the team honest, sort of, are we delivering value or are we creating waste in that sense?
But because that really drives home the need for communication and the need for clarity and the need for focus, which is...
But the team then also needs to understand, I think in the data science community, I think at least historically it's been sort of, people have had a hard time being led by someone who's not a more senior data scientist or sort of, I think the team also needs to understand that you can lead without being more technically skilled in that sense, and you need to kind of accept that kind of leadership. If you look for someone who will challenge you on your sort of scientific approach or experiment setup, that's someone else. That we have a chief data scientist who we can sort of rote into that. But I think because that has been sometimes a challenge, that sort of you don't get the respect if you don't have the sort of that certain deep discipline training.
And now we come back to something we talked with Daniel Engberg, Scandinavian Airlines here. I think he said it really well now. We need to understand leadership and steering in at least two different dimensions. So the discipline dimension, challenging on the
content,
versus the domain or the tactical view of the cross-functional team that needs to create something. Yeah. And this is two different. You need both.
Yeah.
Oh, if someone needs guidance in both dimensions, I guess.
Yeah, and the person who sort of who ticks all the boxes is almost impossible to find. So you can't solve that equation, or you would probably have a very hard time finding those people.
Awesome. I'm struggling a bit to, we have so many questions left here that we can't finish. So I'm trying to find the right priority here. But I still don't really want to leave, before we go into more philosophical, societal kind of topics. We've spoken so much about, mixed teams, etc. But then, and we also spoke about Scrum Masters and product owners, etc. But what is if you were to recommend a company to set up some kind of product team that includes some kind of data science competence, what type of roles would it be? I mean, you can think product owners, Scrum Masters, HR coaches, you can think data engineers, ML engineers, software front-end engineers, whatever. What do you think a good mix competence set would be?
I would have sort of, and those, I think the composition of those could actually change depending on where you are in the life cycle of your product.
Just to set up, I think we all agree that we should have teams that are set up to have a full ownership of a product life cycle to start with. Anything else would be strange, right? Yeah. So we just
the problem. This is part of the transformation that we don't all fully understand that.
But
if we take that as a given, take that as a given.
But that team also needs to have a mandate to change the processes.
Exactly.
It can't only be the technical ownership.
Exactly.
So that makes the team fairly wide in that sense. But I mean, you need to have some sort of data engineering competence. You need to have data scientists and very important data or business analysts that sort of can typically understand the dynamics of the problem and sort of the interlink between the data and the business
the real
problem,
business problem,
the real business problem.
process. Yeah.
We typically find them being the real unlocks. And then
the real what?
The real unlocks for the pro. I mean,
okay, they are these linking pins.
Yeah,
the translators.
super important, and that we typically require that some superstar from the client plus our consultants play that role. You need domain experts that can sort of help you tailor the solution or the decision, and then you need the actual users. I mean, the actual the pricing.
What do you mean, actual users in the team?
Who will, if we build a pricing engine, the pricing manager, who will actually use the system, they should be in the team. That isn't necessarily sort of. It could be the same as the domain expert, but I mean, we typically want the users of the solution in the design team or in the development team. And then as I said, this will change over time. So in the early phases, you might just only need a fraction of people's time. And then you have a heavy development phase where you scale up the ML engineers and data engineers. And then you scale down, and then you might have a team that sort of, if you have automated a lot of things, you need a team that is sort of second line support and so keep things in track. So
but this is what you're saying now is super important and misunderstood. It's not the handover over time. It's the full team, but the intensity of the work for the different team members goes up and down depending on the cycle.
Yes.
This is a huge difference, by the way, if you don't get that distinction. I think it's vital that you understand that product team as that.
Yes,
fully agree.
You didn't even mention data ops. I was a bit surprised, but
I think that to me is the data engineering team.
Okay. Team
then
or member.
Team or team member, and then I think sometimes we say that you have a product team that is more that owns the actual decision process, and then you can have enabling teams. The data ops team could be a part of it, but depending on your architecture, you might take data ops teams that actually serve a number of different use cases. Ideally, you have because you have data products or data assets that are sort of reusable. So you could have someone from that team to make sure that if you need to create new data assets for this specific use case, but they work more horizontally than in use case silos or product silos. But it's good to implant them in the team, but they don't need to be dedicated to the team over time.
You said enabling team, and I don't think a lot of people are familiar with different types of teams here, and I don't recall exactly the name.
No, but actually, you're stealing my thunder here.
Okay, sorry.
Because we are now almost referring a little bit back to, I think the book we all read is Team Topologies. Have you read it?
I haven't read it, no.
But have you heard about Malpay's Team Topologies?
Yes.
I mean, he is then highlighting and distinguishing between stream-aligned team. This is our cross-functional team. Then we're talking about platform teams, typically servicing stream-aligned teams so they become more efficient. And then we talk about enablement teams, where basically people of different discipline expertise is maybe pushed into streamlined teams to support where we have a gap, and then subsystem complex teams, like something super complex on its own, right? So a fairly good book to start thinking about team topologies, but I would argue platform, product, software. So it's not easy always to find that completely in a big enterprise, but let's start here. Like this, now I'm sort of giving a nutshell definition of the book's definition of enablement team and stuff like that. So this is quite interesting stuff, and it's really important. I think they are critical to understand these flavors when you go on this.
No, I think the product,
journey.
as you said, the product teams are typically streamlined, so or workflow as workflow line, and then you have either platform or enabled teams that that from a company perspective are more sort of ensuring sort of reusability, efficiency of things that shouldn't be unique to a specific product. And then you can have a development cycle where they implant to the product team to develop data products that are specific to that, but then they are responsible for kind of taking that back into the data layer to make them reusable. That shouldn't be the task of the stream enabled team, because they mostly care about that it's usable for them. So I think finding this rhythm where you can do things in a silo way, but then you have mechanisms, funding as well, so you can generalize it back to make it useful for others. I think, and that's lacking in most companies I see. So you do it once and then it stays there, and then no one else can see it or find it or use it.
Analytics.
And then next time someone needs that, it's done again and again and again. I think, interestingly enough, a few years back, everything we talked about was the different kind of use cases or products. Now we talk much more about, and our clients ask much more about sort of data at scale or AI at scale, and how do we need to set up our data governance and data management practices. That was, no one was interested a few years back. Now everyone is very interested.
Just before we leave off the set of competences, we didn't speak about product owners or scrum masters or tech leads or whatever type of role you have there. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think it's depending a bit of what the problem you try. It's important to have one lead in a way. We and depending on the size of the team, you might have a product owner and combined scrum master. I think that's sort of. I like a pragmatic approach of agile. I think there's it could become a bit too much sort of artifacts and
because some people would say that the scrum master should never be the product owner.
I know, but I think, and we might do heresy here, but I think
I'm with you.
We cost money. We can't have too much sort of
overhead.
You said it, but we can't.
I think overhead is.
But we need to drive for results, and then if the client chooses to have agile coaches and scrum masters, that's fine. But we're typically very focused on getting things out there and start doing impact. I think that the agile coaches can play a role in terms of just setting the rhythm of the team and explaining why we do things in a certain way, and getting the team to actually have proper retrospectives, just that you actually learn from and improve from. Our teams typically that is also the role of the product owner. We load a lot into that role, but I know you've split it out quite often as well. But I think the danger with agile and some variants of it is you get caught up in a lot of different ceremonies and you sort of forget about what you're actually how to deliver. So we typically are more focused on deliverables than the sessions. Then we of course have all the sessions and together with the clients we spend a lot of time up front to find good ways of working, because they typically have one version of it and we have one version. How do we marry those into something that becomes a good collaboration model?
And since you're a specialist of scaling AI and data, I guess, there are people also that speak about scaling agile and things like safe agile framework, etc. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but
I run into it quite often. Yeah.
Any thoughts about that? Because I hear a lot of people that are negative. I hear some people that are positive. What do you think about?
I think it's good. It could be good. I think it's good in a way to provide a structure for managing large organizations that have gone into scale, into agile, just because you typically lose control of where you put your resources, budgets, who's doing what comes out of each team. So in that sense, it provides a good planning framework and prioritization framework and hopefully measure framework. But if just as with data governance, if you do it wrong, it builds a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of overhead and layers with reporting. So I think it can be if you don't get it sort of in a pragmatic way, it risks slowing down a lot of things. But I understand it from a managerial perspective. You need to, a lot of companies that go into massive or scaled agile, they lose control completely of what they're doing and how much money they're spending where. It becomes sort of.
I think, as anything, the intentions of SAFE is good. But I've seen so many bad implementations of it, so I'm a bit skeptical.
But isn't it? I think you said it, Andreas. Like sometimes it's almost like we lose sight of what we're here to do, and I guess you can call it bureaucracy takes over, right? It becomes a process, it becomes a tick box exercise, it becomes mechanics. Yeah. But as it adding the value, and it goes back to, I heard one of the persons bashing the whole agile industry, the biggest is one of the founders of the Agile Manifesto. This was not what I wanted when I was putting up the manifesto up in my cabin in Whistler, right? Yeah. We were going for a mindset, and now someone turned it into an industry, and somewhere agile went from a verb to a noun. When did this become a product? It wasn't a product; it was a mindset. So I think that's the risk.
I think it starts when all large organizations have the same disease. You start doing something and then you start assigning roles, or you even hire people into certain roles. And of course you give them a task, they will do what they're hired for. So I don't blame them in that sense, rather than building it sort of bottom up, or from the bottom up, from the practitioners saying, how do we become more efficient and effective?
And even allow, I think, some teams to be overlapping sometimes. Yeah. And the goal, of course, should be that they should be as autonomous and independent as possible. But the more you try to force some kind of top level control on something, it can go wrong. Yeah.
But I want to test something here, because I see two different paths here, which is quite natural why this becomes really, really hard for the enterprise. So when you're in a natural startup moving into hyper scaling, you have this logical, now we're 2 guys, now we're 4 guys, now we're 8 guys, 16 guys. So then as you mature, your problem changes in terms of managing this. And then pragmatically you apply the stuff that you are trying to do. My argument is, even if I'm in the biggest enterprise today, 100,000 people, when you go onto the data journey, it's going to be very, very hard to do that as a big bang and having 400 people in 50 teams from scratch. When you go on that type of journey top down, I think it's really, really hard, rather than hyper scaling fast on something from, ground up. What do you think? I mean, what have you seen here?
I've seen both. I've seen that the sort of agile journey and sort of team journey starts typically in some department, typically in IT, or if they have development, and then sort of it gets adapted or adopted by other parts of the company. So it typically not a big bang. I think big engineering and IT organizations, you can start overhauling into agile teams. The problem then is typically it doesn't match with the underlying IT stack. So you need to artificially create teams that work in the same silo. So I mean, it's hard.
It doesn't fit with the steering, by the way. No, we have a project steering, and now we want a product steering.
Exactly. And what is a product in an enterprise? It's very vaguely defined, and because they're used to work in projects, and that's how you fund it, and you fund line organization. So it becomes a steering problem in that sense, and prioritization problem that is quite hard to tackle if you go from a project and line into an agile.
So it's about understanding also what is the underlying root problem here. Yeah.
The time is also flying away. Should we move a bit more into?
We still a couple of more of your minutes.
If
sure. It's okay. Yeah, sure. But I think we need to. We should move into the next stage.
So BCG is of course a global company, and we can also think about Sweden, and we all want Sweden to succeed and be a great nation. And I guess that the more we can become data and AI driven in Sweden, the better. But we have a lot of rules and regulations. We spoke about GDPR and AI Act, etc. What do you think is the best approach if we were to accelerate the use of data and AI in Sweden? It's not a simple question, I know.
Nope.
So feel free to speculate. But do you have any thoughts about, can Sweden become successful in using data and AI? And if so, how? How can Sweden become successful as a nation for using data and AI?
I put my hope to history a bit because we have shown that we as a nation can be build very innovative and build large companies that are now global from engineering. Yeah. So I hope that we can sort of take the next step into be competitive in AI as well. And I don't think we as a nation can be dominant in AI generally. I think we put our hopes to that those companies that are leading in their field today will be able to take the leap and not be disrupted, but take the leap to kind of be vertical champions of AI in their respective industry. Vertical. I think that's the approach. I think we need to then build sort of innovation ecosystems in those companies need to animate that together with academia and be much more open to sort of sharing data and sort of invite academia into that. I think if you look at the big global tech companies, they are big enough to do their own innovation. I think I'm not sure how much they need academia in that sense because they're so. I mean, if you look at Google and sort of OpenAI, they are ahead. It feels like, but in Sweden, I think they're ahead in some. They're ahead a bit, but I think there could be a lot more interchange between the two.
Yeah.
So
it's still, I mean,
but it's still sort of also from the basics. We need to get people interested in math and coding and go into engineering degrees and sort of, because I think to be innovative in this space, pretty soon you will have to go fairly deep into this to kind of create something new.
I usually try to find a positive spin on most thing I can, unless it's impossible. But I think Sweden has a lot to be proud of. I mean, we built a lot of very impressive companies like Spotify or Skype or King or Minecraft or Klarna or Truecaller. I mean, it's a lot of tech companies that are unicorns. Perhaps some of them, like Klarna, is not doing that well today. But anyway, that there is something I would argue that makes startups in Sweden become surprisingly successful.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah.
And potentially one reason would be we may not have the best education, but it's surprisingly good. And
I think we're pragmatics.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
I think. Well, I mean, look at Ericsson, for example. I think they've, of course, had their fair share of PhDs that have taken part in developing sort of the different generations of mobile communications. But also the path before was also to go through high school engineer and sort of also the vocational training they got in those companies. They also created a lot of innovation. I think you shouldn't underestimate the sort of the.
Even the enterprise companies are surprisingly successful. Like IKEA and Ericsson and Scania, perhaps.
No, but I think Swedes are pragmatic, and I think the Swedes are really good and has shown historically to find good solutions to kind of critical problems and being innovative in that sense. I think the latest generation of tech companies, I think. That's also a product of Sweden being ahead in hem-PC-reformen and bredbandsstöd, so that everyone had a PC in their home when they were kids, and so very high IT literacy. I don't think that's sort of coupled with sort of AI specific. I think that's much more sort of people being used to being around computers and sort of using the internet and sort of finding gaps in that turns into sort of possibilities to innovate and create businesses. I think that is that. And I mean, don't underestimate the gaming scene and piracy and what have you. I mean,
a lot of successful gaming companies in Sweden as well.
And I mean, and also Sweden has been, I think it's a funny story. If you look at the piracy tools that were sort of rampant when it was at late 90s. I mean, DC++, Kazaa, all of that, and
don't reveal all the knowledge you have in
and torrents and stuff like that. There's a lot of innovation that went into that sort of went into that industry. I think, and that was
torrents, came from Sweden.
So there was a lot of homebrew sort of innovation that then became companies. But I think there needs to be also. and I hear it quite often that sort of the industry wants more support and more effort behind that on a sort of as a nation. In that sense. I don't have the answer there.
I have another positive spin. Why Sweden is better positioned than we think. A personal friend and a guy who's been on the podcast, Sumil Gupta, he's an Indian guy and he worked for Bosch for many years, and he moved to Sweden, I don't know, 5 or maybe 10 years ago. But we have had quite deep discussions trying to better understand what happens now when we're moving to a more AI-centric operating model. And we have already touched upon the fundamental of mixed teams. And all of a sudden now, if you take a step back and you look at sort of the more hierarchical, Tayloristic way of looking at leadership, how decisions are made, his argument is that this is like when we are very private, it's like, dude, the stuff that you're talking about and how you are discussing this stuff in Scania as an example, you know, it's so far away from the management and leadership practices in other parts of the world.
True.
They will struggle truly to work in cross-functional teams. They will struggle with this new team topology more than you will. I find that quite interesting that he sort of said like, because he has then a completely different understanding for leadership and management, having seen it in different parts of the world.
That's true. Yep.
I mean, you can maybe contrast a little bit with Russia.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we have typically very flat organizations probably helps. I think it helps innovation. I think it helps sort of bottom-up innovation. I think sort of a lot of innovation actually comes from having, and that's hopefully that could sort of be a bit of a swing back that we have production here as well. I think production near sort of innovation is very powerful. I think outsourcing all of it to China is super dangerous.
And then we talk about outsourcing data because maybe not the right way.
No, I agree. I think we probably have the prerequisites, but we also really need to realize we're not the biggest nation in the world. So I think we need to pick our fights in that sense.
Which one are they? You said the vertical. I think that's
no. I think the industry verticals where we are dominating. I mean, telecoms, mining industry, transport, industrial machinery. I mean, that's where I think the innovation should happen. And then of course the new tech companies and the unicorns will drive innovation on their own in that sense. And I think they've played a huge role in sort of making Sweden and what it is today, just creating the ecosystem around it of innovation, but also funding and the angel networks and sort of it's, I think, fairly easy to start something today and get support, either financial or moral, in Stockholm, because there's so many experienced founders around that are also super helpful. I've realized. So I think that is in itself is a strength.
The whole ecosystem we're talking about now.
Yeah.
And perhaps another question related to that. I mean, of course, we can see some tech giants in the world.
Yeah.
Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Chinese, Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, etc. And they, of course, are super dominant, the most valuable companies in the world in any kind of sector, more valuable and more powerful, I would argue, than most countries even. What do you think about that? If we call it the AI divide, it's a term we used here, because between the few very dominant compared to the rest of the world. Are you concerned with that, or what's your thinking about the AI divide?
I mean, what they do have is, and what makes them really hard to catch up on is that they have, despite all the regulations, very, very good information of what we do in our everyday lives and all the interactions and how we move around and how we shop. And that, of course, they turn into products. I think, and that they they all are in sort of winner takes all economies. So they become very powerful in terms of profit. They accumulate a lot of profits. I think that's a very hard catch up, but that also allows them to spend copious amounts of money on R&D, sort of attract and retain talent. And also they're so far ahead in the ability to do research and innovate in or the capability they've built. I think that's a bigger divide than that they're a big tech company. I think what the infrastructure and the capabilities they built around it, that they can sort of
long-term
strategies is a bigger divide than that they have yours and mine information. Actually,
I agree with that,
and I think that they are going to be dominant in sort of in the thin or thick layer of data that comes out of our daily interaction on the internet. But I don't think that. I think there's still a lot of industry verticals where they won't be dominant, where the either new challengers or existing champions will continue to be dominant. Because I mean, Google cannot even go into all the verticals. They go into few, but I think they will continue to be fairly dominant. But then again, you can see Facebook is sort of their popularity is waning. TikTok came out of nowhere with each sort of
for Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, I mean, and we shouldn't underestimate the need for or the opportunity to create new behaviors with each sort of passing generation or even micro generation. I mean, 14-year-old has a totally different behavior than a 20-year-old and use different apps. So I think I wouldn't overestimate the dominant position of them. I, however, think that their capabilities are really hard to catch up on.
Maybe for me, I think it's the capability, and when they want to and see the adjacent industry where it makes sense to apply their capability to somewhere else. I think that's when they move into that industry, they are years ahead. I think that's maybe... I wonder how we will look at the whole social media phenomenon in 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
If it will grow, if it will be a blip on the map. Nevertheless, the whole capability, the industrialized approach to data and algorithms.
And the talent.
And the talent, right?
Infrastructure.
Legal
resources.
The the whole machinery, right?
Yeah, I think that's the big thing.
That's the big thing. Okay, yeah, I agree.
To just find a positive spin,
yeah.
which I always want to do.
I mean, but they also do good. I mean, they release a lot of things into the open. I mean, AlphaFold, and I mean all of these things, and GPT-3.
And not only that, I mean, they open source so many things.
Yeah.
Not only the code, but also the data sets and the models. So that's actually, I think, a really, really good opportunity for a lot of startups, even in Sweden.
I think so.
That we can very, very quickly start to accelerate. And I remember, I think it was Sundar Pichai, I think it was the Google CEO that said that I'm not afraid about other enterprises. What I am really afraid about is the small startup that found a new innovative way to use data or AI that we haven't thought about. And I think that's really true. And it's really encouraging, I think, for any kind of person in Sweden or wherever, that we can start to think in innovative way, and that is really what our goal should be.
Yeah, I agree.
Another, I'm not sure if it's a philosophical question, but to some degree it is. I think we touched upon it already. The future of ecosystems and collaboration. You were highlighting now. We kind of need to be maybe focusing on being the best in our vertical. But what we need to have now is a completely different way of collaborating between the large incumbents, enterprises, academia, and maybe startups. Or what do you can we elaborate on where should that go? How important? I think this is absolutely key, but it's something missing here. Or there's some way of open innovation, call it whatever you want, right?
When you talk AI and data, I think you mentioned it, the data sets that, if the industry wants the academia to collaborate around innovation in AI, they need to get access to real data sets. I think that, and a few industries actually have started those initiatives. I think that's super important because that will be what drives those ecosystems. I think it's really hard for startups to collaborate really with big corporates because they typically cannot find the way to navigate to the right stakeholders, and a lot of companies have some sort of innovation competition. They give a bit of funding, but that's all. I think the startups have more to gain from an open collaboration with universities actually than sort of big corporates. But it's not as customers, of course, but I think I mean the corporate venturing is a big topic. Has been a big topic. Has been many failures and then a few successes. But I think you need to want something more as a big corporation than just sort of invest a bit of money. And I think you need to want to open up your own ecosystem for those companies that you invest in and support them in a way that actually is beneficial for them.
But isn't this
it's a bit of a window dressing today?
But is window dressing today, or what do we call it, innovation theater? But we are needing something. I mean, we are talking about this, but there's something else in terms of openness, innovation, or collaborative approaches that are not.
Yeah.
I mean, like, or you're saying, like, the startup should work with academia for and use.
I didn't say screw it, but I just say that I think it's they have a lot of innovation cups, and then you can win a bit of funding
innovation
money.
Theater.
Yeah, but I think it doesn't. It gives a bit of a tick in the box, and maybe opens up a bit of a network. But I don't think it's sort of, if you work as a startup if you should ideally find your customers and your use cases and sort of get a bit of give and take. Now it's more kind of, we'll invest a bit in you, and that's what we can contribute with. And I mean, big corporates aren't experts in startups, so there's only so much that they can actually bring, I think.
Yeah.
So in general, you would say you are positive to coming future in Sweden and for startups here and for other companies, and if they need to get started with becoming more data and AI driven, they should obviously reach out to BCG, I guess, but not be afraid to be innovative in general, right?
No.
Cool. Andreas, what's next in your life? What's happening coming weeks, months,
I'm
privately, professionally?
getting back into the suit. No, I don't have a suit that often anymore. But now I'm going back from parental leave. I've been on parental leave since summer, so I'm looking forward to get back into the work and picking up that gradually now during November and being back fully in December. So that's going to be fun. Privately getting kids into kindergarten and those kind of things. That's also fun.
That will
super
keep you
rewarding.
occupied for some time, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyone that you would recommend to this podcast that you would like to listen to yourself, perhaps?
Yeah, I think I would find it super interesting to hear Urban Eriksson at Validio, or an old student acquaintance of mine, David Broman, who's a professor at KTH, who does a lot in probabilistic machine learning, and also has been working a lot on a new programming language and stuff like that. So he's and has a lot of good thinking and philosophies around this. So
you always craving a techie counterpart.
Now you have two.
Now you have
both
two.
of them. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Right? You should be happy with this one.
Yeah. Sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Andreas, it's been a true pleasure to have you here.
Likewise.
And
thanks for having me.
We could have continued for a lot of time and so many questions left here, but I think it was an awesome discussion. So thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having me. Thanks. Andreas.